investment and all this stuff, and then realized that like I shot something and then started to cry.
Right.
So, to your listeners, this probably isn't great.
So what are you doing here?
So this is my favorite part of the animal, and it's almost inedible. But you've had ossobuco?
Oh, yeah. We have it as a dish at my family's restaurant in Pennsylvania.
There we go. So this is the Elks version of ossobuco. Hole in the bone, keep the bone in.
Yep. That's exactly an ossobuco.
So what I'll do is when it's time, this will be one dinner. I'll cut
Oh my God, this would be so good.
Yeah.
I love ossobuco.
It's my favorite. I'll cut a few, wrap it up in twine, and then braise it real slow, and then either do like a risotto or a polenta with it. Real traditional Italian preparation, and it is my favorite thing because it's inedible, full of tendon, full of like gristle and silver skin and just horrible, gross things that you can't eat and won't be part of any of the rest of it.
Right.
The rest of these things, for the most part, except for like the big shoulder roasts, I'll break down and I'll take them off the bone. But
that you leave on. Yeah,
that is my favorite.
Because that marrow that's in there, gold in there.
Yeah. Ooh, got my tub. So the processing was the next step that I realized I was going to want to do because it's just one more thing I could do for myself. And again, you kind of see with a lot of horror stories about processors. You know, most of it's probably sour grapes in some cases, but you never want to think of the idea that you're not getting what you found.
What you gave them.
Yeah, because you are dropping it off and you're trusting them and you're saying, hey, you're going to give me my animal and my animal alone, right? We're not mixing it with cow. It's not going to be with another deer. I'm getting what I brought. And you don't really know that. They can give you whatever they want. It comes in packages. You know, they make it into a burger. They add cow fat to it, so you're not part of that process. You don't know where that cow comes from.
Right.
You don't know much of anything. So I went to Texas that year, and I found a bunch of whitetail, which are the little deer that you're used to from back home. And I shot 3 of them, and took them home, and just started doing this exact process. I've already cut the back straps off, already got the prime cuts off of it, and now I go to the part of saying like, okay, so it's got a little off color, so that's going to be dog meat most likely.
Okay.
But being able to break it down.
How do you tell it's off color?
So just the outsides. These are the parts that are exposed to the air, so you can cut just an inch into it.
Yeah.
It's not bad. These have not gone sour or anything like that because they've been cold for the last week. It's been basically wet aging in a cooler, and so these outside bits, they just get a little bit of the color, and these are the kind of steps that make it so that sometimes people say they don't like the taste of game meat because it's too strong. Most of the time, it's just either the cooking or the cutting part where they made a mistake, or the butchery process. Like in the field, they let it go for too long, and it was hot that day, and that's always a disaster. So learned how to butcher, learned how to skin them all. 3 deer. It was a great training. It was again, I found a ranch in Texas that has too many deer, not too much money for, be able to take a lot of does, and you got to put your ego aside and to not say you're going after a big old buck. I'm like, even as much as you might want an awesome rack on the wall, the more important thing was I wanted a whitetail, and I can afford the does, and they taste better. So that was the next step, was that, and then I did a bunch of local stuff. I joined up with that ranch.
How long since you started doing this?
2016. Yeah, November 2016. I shot that elk. and then my kid was 2 months old.
Gotcha. You're 36.
37.
37.
Yeah. Although for some reason I keep saying 40. I just jump up. But yeah, so learn how to do it. Again, Meat Eater has actually a great episode on, I don't remember what season it was, but how to butcher a deer. And it goes from skinning it all the way to this part here where you're cutting big chunks off of it. And it's the perfect guide. 20 minutes. Every step that you would take shows you. I mean, the deer's already gutted, so it's not the field dressing part, but every single step is done for you, or is at least outlined for you. And
so, what is it that you're leaving in the field that you don't take back?
Intestines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're opening and removing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For this guy, I didn't. This guy did something called the gutless method, where you cut the skin off the side and you take all the meat off, and then you take the meat out of the ribs, but you leave the intestines inside. Because it was cold and it was night, you can get away with that. If it's California hunt and it's hot, which...
How do you get this all back? I mean, you're just hoofing it.
Yeah.
Carrying a bunch of stuff.
And this...
Were you far from where you...
Not at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was... it's a weird place in Arizona where you are in sight of a highway the entire time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, a major highway.
Okay.
They just live in this river. It's almost impossible to get into them, which is why you can access it, which is why you can get tags there. But it's not something that is like a hardcore wilderness hunt. I did one of those a couple years ago, and I went to Idaho, and I was 10 miles back on a horseback. Stayed out there for 10 days, and I didn't see. I heard elk. They were screaming at me from 15 yards away, but I couldn't see one.
Wow.
So I got no shots, and I came home with just stories, which are great stories. This was what you would call a gentleman's hunt. I stayed at a very cheap little motel in a dying town, and got everything worked out. Oddly enough, within sight of a gas station. And sometimes that's not bad. Like I do. You do some hard ones and you do some easy ones, and you definitely appreciate how much easier it is to be able to just kind of go out whenever you want to and take a swing at something.
You watched a Netflix documentary and got into hunting, and I watched it and got into bread making.
Bread making is awesome.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the Air episode of Cooked, I would have never started making bread. That's interesting. It's
honestly the Ranella factor. He's just such a good ambassador for what they're actually looking to do. That he's probably the number one influence on why I did it. Kind of like I wanted to play guitar because I went to see the Weenie Roast, and I saw the Stone Temple Pilots guitar player.
Yeah. And
I had a really good view. We had good seats, so we were kind of behind. Dude, and I could just see all this goofy stuff he's doing.
Yeah.
And
his mojo is awesome.
And I never learned how to play anything remotely like that because it's this very controlled stuff. But it made me want. And I remember the moment. I was like, that's the guy that made me want to play guitar.
I saw them on their tour for the Core album. The first bit, sex type thing and all that. And it was them, the Melvins, and the Butthole Surfers.
Oh, wow.
The Butthole Surfers were absolutely amazing. Stone Temple Pilots were great, but the Butthole Surfers stole the show. They were so wild and awesome and loud and super tight.
Yeah, I am easily inspired. Nice. So these
tell me.
Are basically the cuts that you just tried.
Okay. You
tried one that comes from the back straps, and then you tried one of these. And you can do these all in one big piece. They're just large muscle groups, so if you get down to the bone, you can carve them all off, but I do tend to like to chop them up myself into these little pieces, because one, it helps build up a grind pile that will go for burger, and two, you can cut them into much more reasonable sizes.
Right.
So this is too much, you know.
Right.
But for if I want to set it up for like a holiday dinner roast, I could leave something this size. But if I was to cut off the whole muscle group, like is typically recommended, I would need a party of 10, probably.
Right.
And again, I don't want to waste it, because you can't get it.
It's a good sharp knife.
It was. It will make contact with elk bone a few times, and it dulls up really quick.
Oh, really?
But
So how did you learn about the knives that you would need, and is there specific things like that you're using that are...
I don't have... There is no gear that gets you there,
Okay.
unfortunately. I have good clothes. I started off with Under Armour clothes, because I like the pattern. It's very deserty, which is good for California. And then I went to First Light, because they actually have a better desert pattern. But the camo, you know, that's really just, it's for show. Like, it definitely is helpful, but if they smell you, it doesn't matter if you're invisible.
Right.
They don't stick around to actually get eyes on you. They're not like us where they have to confirm it with your eyes. They know, and they're like, oh, that's off, and they're gone.
Well, yeah. When it's kill or be killed,
Well,
you will
it's
be...
run or be killed for
run
them.
or be killed, right? Yeah.
Although a guy did get stabbed up last week by a big boy. He got stabbed and his kidney got lacerated. If you've ever seen the elk horns, you definitely don't want to get stuck by them.
No.
Where were we?
I sent the photo of you with the elk to my buddy who's a hunter, my buddy Tyler.
Mhm.
I do all the hiking with. And he called it a spiky.
Yep.
So that's a nice spiky.
It is. So that's like, if it was a deer, we'd call it a forky. So basically, it's a 1-year-old elk. And that's partially why they're so tender. The downside to the really awesome, giant-headed 6, 7, 8-year-old males is they've been through wars. They've been, you know, if they are rutting, they're rutting harder than this spiky, because the spiky might get laid, but he's probably not gonna, because it would be by accident if like he got selected. But those guys, they are brawling, and they are brawling for their ladies, and they got to keep all their ladies in one spot, and they are fighting each other all day long. And there's constantly another elk coming in to stir up the problem, and that's what this hunting season is it's taking advantage of them being distracted by their breeding, and hopefully, and this is the part we kind of talked about on the phone, you get to connect with them with calls, and you can hopefully communicate with one of these giant animals, and he'll respond to...
I definitely started YouTubing elk calls.
And if you ever... God, I've only seen or heard elk bugling a couple times live. This last trip I did get a few bugles really far away, but it's an area that you're not supposed to hear bugles, so it was extra special. And I've heard an elk just screaming at me from just on the other side of a bunch of trees. And that was the most insane thing I've ever heard. It was like the war cry in Planet of the Apes.
Wow.
So it's that like long pitch, but then this, and you're just like, what the shit is on the other side of this bush? and you know, it's an enormous thing. It's like a Lord of the Rings style animal that's just on the other side of that bush, and you can't see it. And there's no room to see it. There's no way you're going to, and he's going to go. Like any second, he's going to realize you're there, and he's going to bail. And so you're just trying. And that was one of the coolest things I've ever done in my life. And I technically failed on that hunt. You know, and it was like mountains, and the horse fell on me, and you know, you get up well before light, and you're out well after.
What are you doing there? Why rub it down with a towel?
Bits of hair, bits of
Oh.
grass.